My favorite part about making the show is getting to do this kind of research. It really does feel like a treasure hunt.
Yeah.
And sometimes you come across a Tammy and you say, Tammy. In 1973, mysterious communications from a young boy came over CB radios in the Southwest, leading to a massive search and rescue mission that generated far more questions than answers. Miranda Zickler, our producer and my co-host for our subscribers-only show Hysteria Home Companion, joins me as I explain the case, now referred to as Lost Boy Larry, and go through the tangle of strange new information I feverishly uncovered deep in the archives of newspapers.com. If you enjoy this episode, consider joining our Patreon at patreon.com/American Hysteria or by subscribing on Apple Plus so you can get access to Hysteria Home Companion, where we tell you stories related to the topics we cover on the podcast. I'm your host, Chelsey Weber-Smith, and this is American Hysteria. Hello, dear listeners. We've got a really special treat. Someone integral to the show. You know her. You love her. Our guest today, to follow along with this story that has driven me mad, is our dear producer, Miranda Zickler.
Hello.
Oh, I'm so happy to have you here in the other room of our home together. Looking at each other on video.
Yes, I'm here to listen to everything you have to say about this mysterious story and the unraveling that you did to unravel it.
Well, you've been working next to me in our shared office as I chart this strange meandering tale.
But I haven't heard anything. I've been very careful not to hear any details.
Yeah. So everything will be a pleasant surprise. I don't know. We'll see. I mean,
can we do a doesthedogdie.com right now? And
thedogdoesnotdie.com.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Cool.
Do you want to explain what doesthedogdie.com is?
I think it's incredibly self-explanatory, but doesthedogdie.com is a very useful website. It's for all kinds of content warnings in film, but you know, the ones I find it most useful for are animal deaths. The other ones are like, does somebody leave a room without saying goodbye? There are a lot.
You never know what could be a trigger, you know?
You never know. And I think that's nice.
That's nice.
But yeah, do you want to just do a general spoil and just tell me whether this story turns out okay?
It does turn out okay. Yes, it does.
Perfect.
That's even kind of misleading.
Okay.
But it does not turn out in any way that anyone comes to harm as far as we know.
Ooh, okay. I can handle that.
All right.
I mean, I can handle a story that doesn't turn out okay. It's just, I like to know what I'm in for.
Hey, when the title is Lost Boy Larry, I think people would all like to know if the boy is okay.
Exactly.
So, you know,
I'm the proxy. I'm the audience proxy here.
Yes. So I was inspired to find out more about this story because originally it was going to be one of the sub stories of the Balloon Boy episode. Mm-hmm. So I was looking for other kind of famous cases of a child going missing that attracted as much attention in such a short time as the Balloon Boy story did.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've got
the Lindbergh baby.
The Lindbergh baby is one of them. We've got like Baby Jessica,
Baby
of
Jessica,
course.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And so those were the kind of stories. Originally, I was like, so maybe I'll do those kind of stories before I figured out the really much more fun ballooning connections that we ended up going with. But this is one of the stories that was going to be told. And then I was like, I think this deserves its own journey. So that's why we're here today.
I am thrilled to be here on Larry's journey.
So this story, which is widely known as Lost Boy Larry, it has been talked about on a few podcasts. I didn't listen to any of them, but I decided that I was going to do what I like to do and go as deep as possible to try to find some concrete answers about this so-called missing child that many now claim was a hoax. Okay. So I went to our favorite website here at American Hysteria.
Newspapers.com.
Of course. And I found some really interesting things, connections, maybe not necessarily answers, but possible answers. And I always think it's kind of fun to take all of you, dear listeners, along the journey of what it was like for me to try to dig up these answers. So that's going to be kind of the conceit of the episode, will be me telling the general story and then me kind of telling what I found as I went along searching through the archives for some more information that might illuminate what was going on at this time. All right. Sound good?
Absolutely. And that is what we do on Hysteria Home Companion, our patrons only show. That is the official tag. This is a behind the scenes look at what the hell Chelsey is doing all the time.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Okay. So we're going to go now, travel with me, Miranda.
Okay, I'm ready.
Back to 1973.
Sick. Perfect.
As we say here at American Hysteria, everything that ever happened in 1974. So a year before everything happened is where we situate La Spoilery in history. So the first thing that we need to know is a little bit about the CB radio.
Okay.
So that is the main technology that was at work during this story. And, you know, you might look at La Spoilery, kind of the main technology there was social media, TV, but this was almost entirely happening on CB radio and then in newspapers and a little bit on the radio. But the CB radio is the most important piece of this.
Okay. Tell me all about the CB radio. I know almost nothing.
Okay, great. So this story happens kind of right before there was this big craze around the CB radio, which stands for Citizen Band Radio.
Okay.
Created, you know, just for the littlest primer here, created 1945 for use during World War II. Same guy that invented the walkie-talkies. And then he took the CB radio and tweaked it for the general public. And that kind of came in the early 1970s. And then by the later 1970s, it was like a full blown craze. There were like songs about the CB radio. It was just a very big craze that now, you know, has kind of been forgotten, like so many of them.
Like the mini disc player. What is the difference between a CB radio and a normal radio, shall we say? So a CB radio is like what you see a trucker use or like a cop. So you kind of talk into that little little bulb thing that's attached to it. This is going to be cringy for those of you who actually know stuff about radios. But you know what I'm talking about, right? It's like you have the mouthpiece you speak into, it's connected to the cord and connected to a bigger radio. And what you can do is you talk into it, and then anyone on that channel can hear you and respond to you if they're within the radius that the radio can reach, right? So it's like a really long reaching walkie-talkie.
Pretty much, yeah.
Like in The Shining.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there are like, at this time in the 70s, there are like 40 different channels.
Okay.
So you would be like, go to channel 11 and we'll talk on channel 11 because there's not as much like radio chatter there. Or sometimes there was like a designated emergency channel. So I'm wondering, Miranda, if you grew up doing anything with walkie-talkies. Did you have walkie-talkies?
Oh, I think I had a short phase of having walkie-talkies, or maybe my friends had them. I don't remember them being very integral to my childhood, which is really a shame because they are fun.
Oh, they're fun.
I am assuming that you were a walkie-talkie child.
I was walked and talked to the boots. Yeah. Yes, I was a big walkie-talkie fan for like a stretch of time, right? And we used to get on the walkie-talkie and just scan the channels until we found other kids that were playing with their walkie-talkies.
Genius.
And then, you could like prank them or whatever. But one time we like just started talking to the people on the walkie-talkies, the kids. And then we were like, meet us at Einstein Middle School, meet us in the woods here. And then we like, just took us a long time talking to each other. And then finally we just like ended up in the same place. And we were like, hey, like that was kind of it. Like we were like, okay, cool. I'll see you later.
Wow.
Yeah. But it was cute.
That is cute.
It was a good way to spend some time. That's what we used to do, people, before the internet. That's how you made friends.
Back in my day.
You met strangers on your walkie-talkie. So that story I tell because the CB radio also worked like that. Like they were mainly used by long haul truckers to communicate about like things like gas prices and where cops were and things like that. But when it kind of got into the hobby lobby, that's when it was almost like this early form of social media, which is like so fun. And people would try to make friends. Like there was always kind of people chattering and speaking in their own code. Like you've probably heard people say like 10-4, right?
Yeah.
And 10-4, good buddy.
The Overlook Hotel. Over.
Yes.
That's just Shelley Duvall.
Yes.
But you mean just generally. Yes. 10-4. I understand.
Yes.
It means, yes, I understand.
And then, yeah, there's like, what's your 10-20? Where are you? There's like a huge amount of these codes that were like, kind of like early social media speak, like LOL, JK, that kind of shortened communication. In addition to that, you would have what was called a handle, which is still what it's called now. And you would, call yourself like Dark Sparrow. Okay. It's the one that just came into my head.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Like the eagle has landed.
Yeah.
Is that specifically, I guess you probably don't know whether that's specifically CB radio talk based on the way your face looks.
Yeah. I think it at least became popularized. I don't know if it was like a World War II thing, but like where you would have, a code name, right? I imagine that may be where it came from.
But it is what they use in planes? Is that a CB radio?
I don't know. I don't feel like that would be, because a CB radio generally can only reach a distance of like a couple dozen miles.
Oh.
But sometimes, and this will become like relevant later, if there are the right weather conditions, it can go like across states.
Wow.
So it's a really it was just a very strange new medium of communication that just didn't have really a lot of regulation or a lot of information about like the correct way to use it. It was just kind of this wild west of being able to contact random people who also had CB radios. I thought it'd be fun to talk about what our handles would be.
Oh my God.
I haven't thought of one. I'm just going to do like, okay, Miranda, ready?
Well, you have to come up with mine and I have to come up with yours.
Okay, you come up with mine and I'm going to count to 3 and I want you to do first thought, best thought. Ready?
Oh my God.
1, 2, 3, now.
Champion diver.
I love it.
Good. Okay. Are you ready to do mine?
Okay. I'm clearing my mind. Okay.
Clear your mind. 1, 2, 3, go.
Monkey face.
You bitch. What the fuck? I gave you champion diver.
All right. Let me do it again.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, go.
Pink flash.
That's great.
Pink flash.
I'll take it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Champion diver and pink flash.
Okay, good. Drop your handle in the comments. Folks,
your CB radio handle. We don't need to know your social media.
Your first thought, best thought, CB radio handle. Thank you.
Okay. So that's just like the context in which we find ourselves for our Lost Boy Larry story.
Okay.
All right. Are you ready to just start the actual tale?
I'm ready. I'm in 1973. The streaking craze has not yet begun in earnest.
It hasn't. No, which means the world itself hasn't really begun. All right. So At 6:30 p.m. on Tuesday, August 7th, 1973, in Fontana, California, a woman named Darlene Ross hears this voice come over her CB radio. She's a hobbyist who's just got a radio on and is listening for fun.
What was her handle? 1, 2, 3, go.
Funny girl.
Nice. Okay.
Okay.
So funny girl's on her CB radio.
Yeah. And what she heard was what sounded like a young boy. And he was saying, "Help, please help me," over the CB radio. Very disturbing.
Yes.
Right? That would be very upsetting to hear. And you'd want to try to help that boy.
Right.
So she responded in earnest, of course, and she was saying, "Can you give me more information about what's going on? Why do you need help? Where are you? What's going on?" And she was really trying to say, like, "Tell me where you are," but trying to keep him calm at the same time. So slowly, she's like pulling out some details from this little boy. She hears him say that his father is dead.
Oh.
And that he doesn't really know where he is. And then she hears the words, "Come on, David, help me." And she's confused about that. She's saying, "Who's David?" He's not really, he's only responding to some things. And she thought she heard him say that he was somewhere in New Mexico. And then the signal kind of went out at that point.
Oof. What a day for funny girl.
Yeah.
That's rough.
Poor Darlene.
Yeah, poor Darlene.
Darlene had actually previously been a resident of New Mexico, specifically Albuquerque.
Okay.
So if you're thinking about this, this is going from New Mexico to California, which is a pretty long distance for a CB.
So it was a clear day.
Yeah, I don't know. I tried to understand the science behind it, but I could not. But for whatever reason, the conditions obviously made it so that this could happen. Maybe. At least.
Okay.
So, Darlene gets in touch with the authorities in Albuquerque and starts telling them, "This is what I heard on my CB radio." But she also felt like she couldn't let the story go. And so she wanted to keep working to get more and more people to know what was going on so she could have more ears on the CB radio, so she could have people ready to start searching for this kid. So she also calls the Albuquerque Journal. They start writing a story and they print it the following morning. So already people are starting to become aware of this child who has said his name is Larry. So Darlene, our funny girl, was actually not the only person who was hearing Larry on the CB radio, which of course is not surprising because anyone tuned into that channel is going to be able to hear what's going on if they're within that radius of distance. More after this. And now back to the show.
This whole story sort of feels vaguely reminiscent of the Hysteria Home Companion episode where Riley, Sodelius Smith, your brother and our associate producer, came on and told us all about the Titanic sinking and how the telegraph related to that and how that night all went and how the news spread back to the mainland. Yeah,
that's a really very cool episode.
It was. I did a really bad job summarizing it, and Riley did a really good job summarizing it. So if that sounds interesting, that's on Patreon too.
And Apple Plus.
And Apple Plus.
Okay. So the people who had also heard Lost Boy Larry were mostly truck drivers who were always on their radios. And then, of course, CB radio hobbyists. What is strange, as we've mentioned, is that CB radios at that time really didn't have super strong signals. And it was rare that anyone outside of a state would hear Larry's messages. But the weather was weird in that it was an ionospheric skip.
Ooh.
That's what they called it. So an ionospheric skip was happening. And
you're doing great. More confidence.
Because of that, people reported hearing Larry as far as Mississippi and Canada.
Whoa.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. Strange.
Do you have any idea what an ionospheric skip is?
I don't. And I can't.
Perfect. It's for another episode.
Scientists, drop your comments below. So the next morning, when that article came out and more people were kind of monitoring what was going on, because of course everyone wanted to get involved, right? Larry came back on the radio and he began speaking with a woman named Linda King. And we do know her CB radio handle, Blue Eyes.
Oh, wow.
Which is nice.
That is nice.
Probably pretty common, but maybe not in the early days. So she kind of did a very motherly tactic with him, just like Darlene did, just speaking softly, trying to gently get more details from him about what was going on. Mm-hmm. And he said the same thing to her, that his dad had died, but now he provided the details that Larry himself and his dead dad were trapped inside the family's pickup truck, which had flipped upside down.
God.
Yeah, I know. Right? Very upsetting.
Yes.
All you're going to want to do in the world is stay on the line with this boy and try to get as much information as you can. So that's what Blue Eyes continued to do. So he also told her that he had no food. He had no water.
Oh my God.
He said he was 6 years old. Remember that everything turns out okay.
Oh yeah. No,
okay. All right.
Okay. I'm fine.
I'm just reminding everybody that this is, remember what we're dealing with here. He also told her that he didn't really understand how the CB radio worked. And he was doing his best to use it. So then at this point, now that they know, okay, New Mexico overturned truck, that's kind of all the information that they have. So that's a tall order for rescue workers. Mm-hmm. But now we have the New Mexico State Police involved, the New Mexico Wing Civil Air Patrol, and the Albuquerque Citizens Radio Association, all joining forces to start this search and rescue mission for little Larry.
I think that the Citizens Radio Association, is that what it was called?
Albuquerque Citizens Radio Association.
That sounds very Chelsey Weber-Smith coded. It seems like a club you should be a part of.
What I freaking wouldn't give. I want a CB radio so bad.
We'll get you one.
Okay. Great. I often listen to the police scanner. Whenever something weird's going on, I'm like, okay, I'm going to find out what's going on. Yeah. And I'm on my phone. Listen, it's crazy.
I thought they turned it off for a while. Did they turn it back on?
I found another one.
Nice. Cool.
Okay.
Great.
So they started this search based on the opinion from the Albuquerque Citizens Radio Association of where they thought this signal most likely was originating from. Mm-hmm. They started to look in southern New Mexico, especially as they heard more people in that area had their own Larry communiques. Mm-hmm. So the Air Patrol equipped themselves with radio direction finders and started flying planes over this wide swath of land where they thought they might possibly be able to find the overturned truck. Mm-hmm. The police joined up with ARCA, as we'll call them, so I don't have to continue saying ARCA. Albuquerque Citizens Radio Association. I know, ARCA's nice. Yeah. And they came together to create a walking search party that had a few dozen people in it. And they all went to the Sandia Mountains foothills near Albuquerque. If you live there, shout out. And then other members of the police were kind of standing by on a bunch of different channels, especially on the channel that Larry seemed to be using to try to stay in contact with him and just monitor more Larry.
More Larry.
So then the United Press International writes a story that makes the whole, drama that's unfolding a nationwide story. Mm-hmm. And for the first time in that Press International write-up, the police said that they could possibly be dealing with a hoax.
Okay.
Saying that Larry, quote, apparently wasn't familiar with the area or any of the towns he had been through, and he was crying almost incoherently. Well, why that would indicate a hoax, I'm not sure, but
it doesn't make sense at all. Okay.
No, it doesn't, but that's what they said.
Got it.
But all that's to say that pretty early on, there were questions, but sort of like in the case of Balloon Boy, no one wants to call hoax too early because that could have absolutely devastating results, of course.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's really no point in calling it a hoax before, you know, the 3-day mark or something. Like, you might as well check it out.
So radio communities that were operating in the Albuquerque area thought that this signal might be coming from this particular canyon that was just south of this like big cement factory kind of in the desert, right?
Okay.
So then all the air teams and several ground teams like all rush to this area, and it was this kind of mountainous region. It was too treacherous for small planes, and helicopters were needed, but the state police didn't have any. So they were able to get in touch with the CB radio enthusiast at the University of New Mexico, who got in touch with the Navajo Nation Council chapter that had multiple helicopters in Arizona.
Oh.
The governor of New York then worked with the Navajo Nation Council to use their helicopters and then also use a National Guard helicopters and a plane. So this is like getting big, right? Like, we're pulling in everything we've got from every direction. And the pilot of the plane provided by the National Guard was actually able to speak to Larry on his own CB radio that he had on the aircraft. So to your question earlier, he is able to talk from his plane on the CB radio. So that's pretty interesting.
And where was the plane? Was it flying over that area?
It was flying over this cement factory area that for some reason they had, you know, I don't know, they like triangulate the signals, access the mainframe, as we say. We don't understand how technology works.
Barely understand how radios work.
Yeah, I know, at all. So once they all were able to kind of converge where they thought this overturned truck might be in this canyon by a cement factory, all they found was like abandoned cars and like fridges people had pushed out of their pickup trucks and like, you know, old ovens and all the garbage you would find in like a dump zone, an unofficial dump zone. There were no overturned trucks. So that was a bust that had included the National Guard, the Navajo Nation Council. Again, like someone from the University of New Mexico. I mean, we're involving a lot of people now.
Yeah.
So then another break in the case comes after that disappointment. The Civil Air Patrol spots a truck that appeared to be abandoned in New Mexico's Manzano Mountains. One of the helicopters gets to the scene, but again, no one's inside, no sign of an accident. The truck's not overturned. Another bust. So that evening, they hear from Larry again, and Larry tells them that wherever he is, it's raining.
Oh, spooky.
I know, really spooky. And so rescuers were able to figure out, okay, it is raining in this other canyon, which is called the 4th of July Canyon, which is super interesting, in those mountains.
Okay.
So Linda, Blue Eyes, is actually still kind of acting as this confidant that Larry seems to talk more to, like feel comfortable talking to. So she tells him to yell onto the radio as loud as he can as soon as he sees any lights in the sky, because they're going to fly over that canyon where they think that he is.
The 4th of July Canyon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they start flying over it. They hear him yell like Blue Eyes tells him to do, but then they go down and where that would have been like timing wise, right? Because that's what they were trying to do is like, okay, here's the plan. If he sees the lights, he must be here. They went, no overturned truck. Nothing was found at all.
Whoa.
Yeah. The search continued the next day. And like, this was about the time when more people were like, is this fake? Like, this is going on a long time. We're not finding anything. And people are using the word hoax. And then this sergeant from the Civil Air Patrol says, quote, I personally have never had any doubt that this is the real thing. I heard the kid crying. I just can't believe it isn't the real thing. Okay. So by Thursday, this all starts on Tuesday. So we're like 2 full days out. News had spread really far about the missing little boy that would be called Lost Boy Larry. And a bunch of people are like ready to volunteer at this point, which is like lovely, right? We've got dozens of specifically teenagers for some reason, but good for you teens, get out there. Adults as well. They were all volunteering to join this search as temperatures were starting to rise into the 90s. So people were getting worried about that as well.
Yeah.
And all this was great. You know, you were like, It's lovely that people want to help, but things start to get really complicated when too many people who have no idea what they're doing get involved in something like this.
Yeah.
So the search party was one thing, but another way that people were trying to help was by volunteering to try to talk to Larry themselves on their own CB radios.
Oh, boy. Okay.
What do we know about CB radios? Everybody's chattering at once, being like, Larry, 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 it's me. Larry, it's me. Larry, it's me. Larry, are you there?
Wow. Beautiful.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay. I didn't plan to do that.
The soundscape.
Yeah. I was like trying to make it like, pan it.
Yeah. Put it in stereo, baby.
So this was making the communication that had been like somewhat consistent with Blue Eyes really hard. So now Blue Eyes is like, I can't hear the kid. Like, this is a big problem. So not only that, but then when kids were hearing about what was going on, they had their little walkie-talkies and they started to, what do we think they did?
Try to talk to Larry?
Great. That would have been a nice thing to do. Instead, they all pretended to be Larry.
No.
Okay. Yeah. So you now have a legion of little pretend Larrys on their walkie-talkies being little dickheads.
What kind of chaos agents are these children?
Yeah.
My God.
I mean, this is kids do this, It's like you just don't understand the gravity of something, I think.
I guess.
But the problem with this too, aside from making it hard to figure out who is the real Larry, was that because rescuers just didn't know what to do at this point, they felt, and I think it's kind of like their duty to follow every lead. Mm-hmm. So they're following these voices and trying to trace these different Larrys, but they don't know what's real, what's not. And they're wasting a lot of time following these leads that they do need to follow. They just didn't know what else to do. So then it gets even weirder. And members of this Wichita, Kansas church say they have received this divine message that Larry was stranded beside an Alamogordo Lake during an all-prayer vigil for the lost boy that they were holding. Christ just into their heads. This information. Of course, they called the police, and I don't actually know if it was investigated or not, but I imagine that it probably was.
Yeah.
Because I think that generally, like even when psychics like randomly call in, a lot of times they're like, well, I mean,
yeah,
what else are we going to do?
Totally.
And speaking of, then from a phone booth, they hear from, of course, a psychic who tells them that Larry is located 20 miles south of the town of Moriarty. I also don't know if that was followed up on, but it was printed in the papers, as all of this information was. That's where almost all of this is coming from, by the way, is just old newspaper articles.
Your independent research? Seriously, I'm asking.
Yeah. I mean,
that's sick.
Not completely. Like the Wikipedia page is pretty good. Like it's pretty well done. And there's a lot there, but I generally then will go back through as much of the newspaper archives as I can to kind of match and make sure that that information is as correct as possible. So people continue calling from all over the country with tips, with their thoughts, with their ideas about where Larry could be. And it starts to jam all the police phone lines. And people are calling in with tips as far away as New York, which is not impossible, right? As we've talked about the ionospheric skip, but unlikely that they have any information that is relevant. But then 2 phone calls appear to offer a break in the case. One family from Florida and one family from Maryland both reported missing relatives named Larry, who were traveling in a western direction, and both of whom had totally lost contact with their family members.
Whoa. And they're both children?
Yeah, they're both young.
With their dads?
Yeah.
Wow. Wild.
But then both of those Larrys were found to be safe.
Oh.
So again, a bust, right? Then another person who was allegedly talking to Larry on a CB radio heard that his last name was Cortesi, which led some Albuquerque residents to make a report that this veterinarian that they all shared had the same name and had just gone on a family vacation, and that people didn't really know where they were. But then they were just in Minnesota and they just hadn't like talked to anybody.
They're always in Minnesota hiding out.
And they're just like,
leave me alone.
Leave me alone. Do you know how hard a vet works?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to Minnesota to be alone.
So, all of these things are just going bust. So by Friday, 4 days after the initial contact, Larry's signal is weakening, or at least the Larry that Blue Eyes is saying, this is the Larry. This is the Larry. That signal is weakening. And what that led them to believe is that the radio was finally running out of batteries.
Yeah. So CB radios are battery powered.
I think so. I think so. And maybe if the car was running, there's a connection that charges it from the car.
Yeah.
I don't really know. The battery's dying.
Okay.
So then a man from Phoenix reports that he heard from a boy named David on the CB radio that afternoon, Friday afternoon. And that little boy said he was hurt, but he was no longer inside the truck, which he said was a red pickup truck with a white camper. And this matters because if you will remember what Larry said in his very first communication, it sounded like he was talking to someone named David.
Right.
So they thought, okay, maybe this is a brother who was also in the car. But then David said his father was hurt. He didn't say he was dead. So there was like just a lot of confusion about who this other person could be. And again, it's impossible to know if it's coming from the same location.
Right.
It's really hard. It's like they can do that, but it's just a really difficult process to try to pinpoint where a signal is coming from.
Okay.
So then CB radio experts started like calculating and talking about how it was like really unlikely that the batteries would still be working even at that point on Friday. That was like a huge stretch to imagine that batteries could last for that many days.
Yeah.
But still, all of these Larrys, many Larrys, all these
oops, all Larrys,
fucking kids were still talking over the radio, pretending to be him. And this was happening like all across the country in different states. There were just like a bunch of kids just, I'm Larry, And so
are you gonna do it again?
I'm Larry. No, I'm Larry. No way, I'm Larry. Fuck.
A real talent.
Please. So then finally, which I don't know why it took this long, but finally there was like an official nationwide request asking CB radio users to stop using channel 14, which was the channel that Larry originally had been on. And then the police made this official statement asking parents to confiscate walkie-talkies from their children.
Get a handle on your children. Yeah.
Like,
Jesus.
Like it's Larry o'clock. Do you know where your children are? Pretending to be a missing child. Yeah. So because there's like no central organizing body, different arms of the rescue teams are searching the same areas. They're going back over areas they've already searched. They're missing key spots that they should have been looking in. And there's just like animosity growing. And there are like so many people on the ground now trying to help and so many people on the radio that the whole thing just is like soured. And then people who shouldn't have been started giving interviews with the newspapers, giving incorrect information. The chaos is growing and people are like, time is running out for this kid, right? I mean, it's been 3 days and it's very hot outside and he's allegedly in this overturned truck. So continuing in this trend of people wanting to help, but probably wanting to do it for their own egos, this fucking University of New Mexico student pays $18,000, which is the equivalent of $129,000 today, to rent his own plane and search for Larry himself.
Okay.
And of course, the plane flew totally out of control and crash landed in the hills where Larry baby was. The guy was okay. But again, it just cost a whole, then people had to go to him and it took resources away. And it's kind of a tale as old as time.
Yes.
Of a guy that's like, I will do it.
College kid. Yeah.
I will save Larry. So by Sunday, this is 2 more days. We're into the weekend. Tuesday to Sunday is how long it's been going on. Okay. And police have actually tracked down several fraudulent Larrys as well as a David, and they were each boys that were fucking around on their walkie-talkies around Phoenix.
Idiots. Yeah.
And I hope he got in trouble with his parents. I don't often want teens in trouble.
It was the 70s, so I think he got in trouble.
Yeah, I guess. I feel like 70s meant you don't get in trouble.
I feel like in the 70s, as long as you didn't get caught, you wouldn't get in trouble. And it was very likely that you wouldn't get caught. But if you did get caught, you'd get in trouble.
Yeah.
What do I know?
Yeah, what do you know? More after this. And now back to the show. So by Sunday, the batteries are totally gone, obviously. They cannot get any response from the original Larry or whoever they think is the original Larry based on whatever evidence they have that that's the original Larry. You know, I don't know how they knew. But because it had been 5 days, there was a presumption that Larry, if he were indeed real, would no longer be living.
Right.
Because of dehydration and exposure to the heat and the things that you would imagine would happen to someone stuck in a car. So the leads are all drying up. They've looked in like every possible location that could have an, you know, because it's like, think about it. It's like you're in an overturned truck. It's not like there are so many places you can go in that truck that can't be searched, right? So they've looked everywhere. I mean, they've like spent so much money. They've spent so many hours and they just can't find anything. And they finally call the search off. And reporters were told by authorities, quote, "We've not come up with any information that is definite enough to say that there is actually someone out there or where this person might be." So then they also explained that there would still be several people working on finding Larry's signal over the next few weeks. So they were calling off like, because at this point they were like going over the same areas. They just couldn't do it anymore. They had looked everywhere, but they just said, we will continue to like listen in case a miracle happens and Larry comes back on the radio. So then a couple weeks later, reports surface of a missing 12-year-old Toledo boy named Larry Zmunzinski. And he had been moving across the country with his family in July, which was the month before Larry was heard on the CB radio. And then the Santa Fe Police Department issues a nationwide bulletin looking for this Larry. And then his family was found living at a campsite, Miranda, just outside of Wenatchee, Washington.
Wow, we were just there for the Apple Blossom Festival.
We were. Yeah, we were rocking out to a dad band and
we went to a weird little carnival right as it was closing in a mall parking lot.
Yeah. And I got drunk.
It was really a lot more fun than it sounds.
No, it was actually really, really fun.
I had a great time.
Shout out to Wenatchee.
Shout out to Wenatchee.
Oh, and we watched a like hometown parade.
Oh, yes.
Which was stunning.
That was really good. My preschool boyfriend moved to Wenatchee. I never heard from him again.
That's really sad.
I know. Someday I'll learn his last name. Garrett, if you're listening.
Leave your handle in the comments.
I'm going to call you on the CB radio. Okay. So we're looking for Toledo Larry. His family and him are at a campground.
Yeah, they were just having, hard times and were living at a campsite. But then a very, very strange thing happens. In Colorado, CB radio operators reported that a man was speaking to them from an unknown location, claiming credit for the Larry hoax.
Oh. And
bragging about how stupid the cops were and how he tricked everybody and he had really pulled off this like elaborate hoax. And then later in the evening, he starts making death threats against both President Richard Nixon and Vice President Spiro Agnew.
Wow.
So he's, just being weird.
Yeah. He's a credible witness.
And so the next morning, the man had gone silent and no one was able to pinpoint his location. But later that night, he was on a different channel again saying like, I'm going to KILL Nixon and Agnew. So, that's as you do, as one does. The threats were reported to the FBI and the FCC and the Secret Service. The man who had reported the new adult Larry expressed his doubt that it was the same person as Larry, claiming that the death threat guy was speaking in a Mexican accent, whereas Larry did not speak in a Mexican accent. So we don't know at all what that was about.
Okay.
But by November of that year, the incident would be officially branded as a hoax by the Colorado State Police, meaning the Lost Boy Larry incident would be officially branded as a hoax, because by then there was just...
They just never found the truck.
There was just... And there was never an overturned truck found.
Yeah.
So unless this truck is in a location that to this day has never been found, this was a hoax. They've never found a stitch of evidence, even of a missing Larry, that would make sense. Like they exhausted every lead. And I think it's important to note that I did read a statistic that every 8 out of 100 emergency calls from a CB radio at this time were hoaxes.
Whoa.
So it was pretty common to hoax the cops on your CB radio, which is stunningly idiotic.
Idiotic. And 5 days.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that how long it was until they stopped hearing?
Yeah, Tuesday to Sunday.
That's just a really long time to be doing that, to be pretending.
I know.
I mean, you want to hope it was a kid, I guess, because that's way scarier if it's not.
I know it is, isn't it? It's very weird. It's all very creepy to me. Yeah. So as far as any official reports go, Larry was never heard from again after this adult Larry making death threats on the president. After all was said and done, the search for Lost Boy Larry, as he was dubbed in the press, was one of the largest that the Southwest had ever seen at that point, and the most expensive ever conducted in New Mexico, costing the equivalent of somewhere between, these numbers vary wildly, but somewhere between $177,000 and $850,000.
Okay.
Which is a lot for that time.
Yeah.
So the next year, the United International Press called the Larry rescue attempt the 4th most important story in 1973 in New Mexico.
In New Mexico. Okay.
Yeah. So that is the end of the Lost Boy Larry story, but that is not the end of my journey.
Of the Lost Boy Chelsey story.
So I decided, okay, this was a big story about a CB radio hoax. What other things can I find in the newspapers about CB radio hoaxes? All right. There were way more than I expected to find. Okay. Like, I really didn't think I was going to find anything other than this story, because it just seemed like I had never, in my research on just the Lost Boy Larry story, which of course was like Wikipedia and then like old sites from like the early 2000s and just it's not a well-trodden story out there.
The 4th most important story in New Mexico in 1973? No way. No way. So a lot of these hoaxes that I came across, and yes, I did chart them on my yellow legal pad. Beautiful, as you do.
Many of them were like reporting a small plane crash or a boat in peril. And every single time, the authorities had to respond, often spending tens of thousands of dollars trying to locate these hoaxes. Because they are able to tell when these are hoaxes, because they're like, okay, no plane is actually missing. Yeah. No boat is missing. You know, it's hard to lose a plane or a boat because there's like registrations involved and, you know, all of that stuff.
Istheboatinperil.com.
Istheboatinperil.com. So whenever this happened, the story would often in the newspaper be like, a plane is missing and authorities were looking for him and they called for help over the CB radio. And then I'd follow that story, and a couple days later, they would announce that it was a hoax and they'd found nothing and that they couldn't make an arrest because it was so hard to track where radio signals were coming from. So it was just such an anonymous network of people. So then I thought, okay, I'm going to go through and check out dates and locations and see if I can find any kind of a pattern of these.
Nothing if not thorough.
I didn't mean to do any of this. So we have June 1972, Nevada, September 1972, North Dakota, November 1972, Florida, December 1972, Florida, right? I'm not going to read all of these. Then there's a bunch more in 1973, kind of every like maybe 2 or 3 months, you'll have another incident in the papers in a different state. And I, was thinking, well, obviously these are probably not connected, but I also thought that if they were going to be connected, it could involve a trucker, because a trucker would be driving all across the country at different times.
God, MacGyver is MacGyvering.
MacGyver is MacGyvering. So then I found this story that I thought was really interesting out of Ottawa in Canada, in this border town called Salt. It's about this man named Joseph Ludwig Setzer. And he is sentenced for making false reports over his CB radio about a group of people who were lost in bushland near Searchmont. And that led to, again, like this whole search and rescue mission, people working tirelessly to find this lost group of people. And he kept that hoax going for like a couple days. So he was detailed in his hoax in a similar way.
Okay.
Wasn't as long, but it was still like he committed to this fake story.
Yeah.
And they were able to trace the signal. And they also were able to find witnesses who were like, yeah, I heard him literally like talking with his front door open really loud. Someone was also able to identify his voice from a recording that someone had made of him talking, like a CB radio person had made.
Yeah, everybody's like, Joe, yeah, he fucking does this shit all the time.
Yeah, he's so annoying. So this guy, Joseph Ludwig Setzer, is sentenced to 6 months in jail starting in March of 1974. And then the reports in the newspapers of CB radio hoaxes completely cease for 7 months.
You drew up this timeline?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hot.
Why? I don't know.
It's hot.
Thanks. So, save for one possible hoax that they have never said was a hoax that came kind of in the middle of all of that. But then in 1975, once he would theoretically be out, they were like popping off again all over the country.
Wow.
I did my best to try to figure out if this man could have been a trucker, because that was what I was thinking. I was like, what if this guy who lives in the border town of Canada, and I looked it up, like there were Canadian truckers who would drive Canadian products, probably not anymore because of tariffs, but people would come down from Canada to drive their truck. Not impossible. And, I was looking at, it was like, okay, like there are a couple months between each of these. There's enough time in between each of them for someone to have theoretically gone to another state to make these calls.
Wow.
Yeah. However, I don't think necessarily that this man was responsible for Los Spoileri or anything else, because I just can't find that evidence. I will say that the only other information I could find about Joseph was in the newspapers. In one story, he was trying out his new .30 caliber rifle in the kitchen of his home at about 11 p.m. When police arrived, hearing gunshots. He said, quote, he was just trying out his rifle, which meant for him standing and shooting 11 shots at a kitchen table drawer he set against the wall.
Wow. Okay, Joseph.
Doesn't prove anything, but just note it for now.
Support. It's evidentiary support.
So then, Miranda, we are leaving Joseph behind.
Oh, bye, Joseph.
Bye, Joseph.
I feel safer now.
He died. I found his obituary.
R.I.P.
But here is what I found next.
Oh, shit. Okay.
In February of 1976, in Hickory Tree, Tennessee, a new child in peril comes over the radio waves. A little girl's cries were heard on CB radio by CB radio user Cherry Blossom.
Oh.
And there were also others who heard. They had heard a man earlier in the day who seemed to be in pain. And then later they heard this little girl who said her name was Tammy. Do you remember when you were sitting in the room with me and I just said, Tammy. And you had no idea at all what I had been doing all day.
I really do. I really do remember this vividly, like it was yesterday.
She said that she was trapped in a car, just like Lost Boy Larry had been. And she said she was near water.
Okay.
After the initial information provided by Tammy, which just like Larry was like very little, all they heard was her whimpering occasionally and clicking the microphone on and off. So a couple CB users thought, okay, maybe she doesn't really know how to use the radio. So they decided, okay, like we're going to get her to just click the microphone once for yes, twice for no. So they're trying to gather information that way. But then different CBers were getting different results. They were able to ascertain, though, from what it seemed, that she was in a wrecked car. But another time, the click said she was in a house, a boat, alone in the woods. Really hard to tell when you have other people on the channel who are using their microphone. You know, it just is, it wasn't going to necessarily be a good indication of anything, this code they were trying to use. But I wonder if perhaps they moved to the clicking because they were having trouble disguising their voice and didn't want to keep talking because there was very little. It was like a lot of like, you know, like a lot of what I think could be fake. So here's something, a small detail that I noticed that I think is very interesting. And that is that Tammy was calling from channel 14, which was the same channel that Lost Boy Larry was calling from. And I checked to see if that was like an emergency line so that it would make sense. And it wasn't. It was just one of dozens and dozens of options. So now 200 volunteers are looking for Tammy, and it's a 25-mile radius they're covering. They've brought in a helicopter, but they have found nothing. It was similar, but on smaller scale to the Lost Boy Larry story. They couldn't find anything. They could not pinpoint the signal. They eventually were like, we've exhausted everything we can. We cannot find this girl. Tammy was never found. It was declared a hoax.
God, if this is indeed the same hoaxer, they must just be really bored.
Really weird.
Really weird.
So just 2 weeks before the Tammy stuff had started, another hoax was happening in Kansas City, Kansas, in which a woman was calling for help for her and her young son.
Okay.
She said that they were trapped in an overturned car in a wooded area near a creek. She said she's with her 4-year-old boy. She says she doesn't know where she is. The voice is tinged with hysteria, is what the newspaper said. Another massive search is conducted. Nothing is found. It's also declared a hoax. And then 10 days after that incident, on February 22nd, which is 4 days before the Tammy incident, so I'm doing my best here, another little girl was heard crying for help in Des Moines, Iowa, which was just 3 hours away from the mother-son accident, and within reason, in the right conditions, possibly connected to the Tammy thing based on distance, right? This time a girl was crying on the radio saying, Mommy, I'm cold. And somebody help me. The car is tipped over.
Jeez, get a new shtick.
Dude, I know. Again, hundreds of searchers found nothing in any of these instances I just mentioned.
Weird.
So then the last thing I uncovered, okay, was I kept going into the 80s. Okay. So I know every CB radio hoax that has happened from the early 1970s until the mid 1980s.
If somebody told me that that was a very specific specialty of yours, I would believe them.
It is now.
Yeah, I would have believed it, and I believe it now.
So yeah, this is the last thing that felt noteworthy to me.
Okay.
And this happened in 1982 in California's El Dorado County, in which another little girl called over the CB radio begging for help. It was heard by CB radio user California Babe, which I love, who said the girl told her that she was in a blue Jeep with her father that went off a cliff, and she was now trapped inside and her father would not wake up. So again, a similar setup to Lost Boy Larry and to Tammy as well. She said her name was either Amy or Annie. She says, I'm cold, I'm hungry, I'm scared, I want my mommy, and I want someone to help my daddy, right? Just like, again, helicopters, special off-roading vehicles, and hundreds of volunteers come to look for this overturned Jeep. They find nothing.
Yeah.
The next day, they hear the small voice crying for help, but then there was laughter. So a prankster was sort of outing themselves. That didn't say the gender of the voice or, anything like that. And again, like in Lost Boy Larry, there had been other transmissions of other people saying, I'm Annie, I'm Amy. So it was a mess. Again, same kind of mess.
Mm-hmm. Now, did they have recordings of any of these? Like, do we have any recordings of Lost Boy Larry now?
We don't.
Okay. Or could they have compared recordings of these? I guess they didn't know. This is all Chelsey Weber Smith's brand new.
No, nobody's made these connections before, I don't think. No, I mean, Tammy and Amy and Annie, and they're all lost to time. I couldn't find anyone on the internet talking about any of them.
All of their names are almost the same also.
I know.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
Larry, Tammy, Annie,
yeah.
Amy. And I go, in this instance, we'd have to, if we will believe that the presidential assassin CB radio guy with this Mexican accent allegedly was actually Lost Boy Larry. We also have to imagine that he was able to do a little girl's voice,
right?
But he wouldn't have to do it for very long. And, I think I wish we had a man around to come down here and try to do a little girl voice. I think it's absolutely probably more likely that these are not connected.
Sure.
But nonetheless, all of it, I think, creates some intrigue, some questions.
Absolutely.
And they're similar stories. They all contain the same elements. They contain, overturned car, little kid, often dead parent, and the willingness to carry on a hoax for a number of days, right?
Yeah.
And a willingness to be so bold as to do that, because the longer you're doing it, the more likely it is that they'll be able to figure out where the signal is coming from.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's the end of my research. That was kind of where I hit a wall, and that was the whole kit and caboodle of this Lost Boy Larry story.
Wow. Well, yeah. And we may never know what happened, but I will say I respect the hell out of your grind, baby.
Yeah, thank you.
That's quite an investigation.
And, we'll never be able to say with absolute certainty that there was no Lost Boy Larry. Much like Balloon Boy, we'll never truly probably know the full story. But I do think that the vast majority of the evidence points to it being a hoax, 100%. And I think it's a good lesson in how, if you want to help, don't. No. No, that's not true. But take the CB radios away from your children. Yeah, and stay off channel 14. And that's the other thing about all of this is we don't know every time, was that the same Larry? Was it the same Tammy? Was it people being like, oh, I can play this game? Yeah. Because it's kids all sound the same. You can make, if you're trying to do your little girl voice, most people have the same kind of way that they would do a little girl voice or a little, kid voice. Yeah, I wish we had recordings of Larry. Dude, you better believe. I do believe that you looked into it. Yeah, I wanted to find them. With all my heart, unless one of those podcasts I didn't listen to has it. Then, yeah, it's just, I don't know how easy it was to record. I know that, we heard that they had recorded Joseph Ludwig Setzer's voice and they were able to use that. So I bet you out there somewhere in some dusty police basement, there is a tape of Lost Boy Larry. And by God, you will find it. Yeah. If it's the last thing you do. And if anybody knows any of the people in this story today, I'd love to hear from them. Absolutely. Chelsey, thank you so much for your investigation and your research. You're so welcome. As always. And thank you for telling me this story. Oh, I was gripped. It was my pleasure. I'm glad I got to tell it because I do love my favorite part about making the show is getting to do this kind of research where I get to follow stories in the paper. Yeah. And it really does feel like a treasure hunt.
Yeah.
And sometimes you come across a Tammy and you say, Tammy. No, when I saw that, my friggin' brain blew up. Well, and Miranda, thank you so much for being willing to come on this journey.
Oh, I loved it. I was engrossed. I was enthralled.
I'm so glad. And again, if you enjoyed this, we are always telling stories together over on Hysteria Home Companion, which is our Patreon and Apple Plus show. Mm-hmm. And if you want to get more, we also always talk about the process of making the episodes. We give like our true opinions on episodes. And we also talk about our own lives a little bit if you give a shit about that. And we talk about the things we've been watching and reading and listening to. And just give you more content because we all need more content, don't we?
It's just to stave off whatever is happening to our brains right now.
But yeah, we'd love if you joined us over there. It's a cute little community. And we so appreciate everyone who helps support our show because really it keeps the show going because, we're an indie show. It ain't easy.
Keeps the show free for everyone, keeps the show going. Yeah, we can't do it without our wonderful patrons.
Yeah. So we would love if you felt like you could give $1 even.
Yeah. And Champion Diver, it has been a pleasure. And this is Pink Flash, over and out.
Over and out, Pink Flash. I don't remember how it goes. 10-4, good buddy. This was American Hysteria. If you liked this episode, you can get plenty more Hysteria Home Companion right now, including our storied back catalog, our many future tales to come, and a far more personal account of the topics we cover and the lives we live. Just go to patreon.com/American Hysteria or subscribe on Apple Plus. You'll also get ad-free episodes, and you'll know that you're supporting our show the best way that you can so that we can continue creating it. You can also go to AmericanHysteria.com and leave us a message on the Urban Legends hotline about a tale that you remember from growing up, and we might do an entire investigation about it. And while you're there, you can pick up some of our merch. You can also follow us on Instagram at American Hysteria Podcast. And if you're feeling extra generous, you can leave us a 5-star review on whatever app you're using, and we will be forever grateful. American Hysteria's producer and editor is Miranda Zickler. Our associate producer is Riley Swedelius Smith, and I'm your host, Chelsey Weber Smith. Thanks, as always, for listening, and I hope you have a great week.